to introduce the speakers one by one. They'll come up and give us their short presentation on what their big idea is for this festival, and then we're going to have the panel discussion, and afterwards I'd like to call for questions from the audience. So please, while we're talking on the panel, please try to come up with some great and challenging questions to ask the panelists. And we do have an extraordinary grouping of some of the most, the leading investors and innovators in the digital economy here today. So it's going to be an extraordinary discussion. First of all, I'd like to introduce Saul Kaplan. Saul is the founder and chief catalyst of the Business Innovation Factory in Rhode Island. There, he and his team create new business and organizational models. They're experts on R&D of business models and value creation. And Saul, I'd love you to come up now and give your big idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne, and good morning. I'm glad I get to go first because if the animated discussion we've been having at the table with my fellow panelists is an indication, it's better to be first. You're in for a treat this morning. I have been droning on since I arrived on Sunday in several different forums here at Amplify about the idea R&D for new business models. Right, it sounds pretty simple. We all know how to do R&D for new products, for new technologies, but do you and your organizations do R&D for new business models? If you don't, you're going to need to start because the half-life of any business model is declining, right? So I'm very focused on that, and while I hope that qualifies for a big idea, I'd like to share another one with you. A lot of people think the big trend today is mobile. I don't think mobile is a trend. I think it's a foregone conclusion. I think the killer trend is self-organized, purposeful networks. Self-organized, purposeful networks. And I think all of us as leaders of institutions had better pay attention to this. If I had told you 5 years ago that a group of passionate citizens in Egypt were going to self-organize, leveraging social media to take down a national government, you would have thought I was crazy. If I had suggested to you 5 years ago that the global leading media and entertainment companies were going to have their effort to pass legislation and regulations around the world to protect their IP, and a bunch of geeks around the world took it down, in a matter of weeks to prevent that legislation, you would have thought I was crazy. And lastly, if you have a campaign within your organization, a development effort to launch a great new product or service, and if you're like most organizations, you've spent the last 2 years, right, building that, keeping it secret, right, putting big black cloths around it so nobody in the public, you could see it, and maybe you snuck out and did some focus groups and then checked off the box that you had consumer input. And if I suggested to you that within 48 hours of when you actually unveil it and put it out in the market, the crowds might not like it and you might have to take 2 years worth of effort and do what with it. I suggest to you that we'd better be paying attention to self-organized purposeful networks. We have the self-organized part, right? That's really going great. People are connecting using social media, exchanging ideas, doing what I call random collisions of unusual suspects. That's happening. That's happening. Watch out when we get the purposeful part right. When these self-organizing networks figure out how to be purposeful, they will change the world. I think the way to make money in a post-industrial era is to pay attention to that trend, learn how to harness, and bring self-organized consumers not just into the process as a market research box to check, bring them into the process as part of the design and creation of new business models. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Saul. There's lots to dig into on some of those issues. The next speaker is Hayden Shaughnessy. Hayden's a Forbes writer and broadcaster. He's a design thinker who writes about innovation, and he's a fellow at the Center for Digital Transformation at the University of California. He's the co-author of a famous book called The Elastic Enterprise, which is a must-read for those companies that want to succeed in the post-industrial era. Thanks, Hayden.
Good morning, everybody. I don't have one big idea. What I actually want to talk about is how you need to be developing concurrent innovation models. Because I think that obviously it's very tempting to look around for one simple business model, but you're senior executives because you know it's more complex than that. To illustrate it, I want to talk about Samsung, which is a company that for many of us came from nowhere to become the leading smartphone manufacturer and vendor. And smartphones are at the leading edge of a lot of what's going on in science and technology. If you go back 15 years, Samsung was actually a contract producer for Japanese companies, those very Japanese companies that dominated the industrial landscape and that we hear very little about now. As it became a contract producer for these companies, what it did was it did something that I think will surprise everybody. It hired 20 Russian engineers, and it contracted with the Russian Academy of Science to take Russian science that wasn't being patented or commercialized and to take over patenting responsibility for it. The 20 engineers were actually experts in what became known as systematic innovation. In fact, very few people think about systematic innovation because we tend to think of it as this big creative thing, those big creative ideas that we, the geniuses of the West, keep having. Well, actually, what Samsung did was said, if we can be systematic enough about everything we do, we'll probably be able to beat Apple. So the first thing these guys did was they said, looking ahead, it looks like plasma or possibly LCD or a new technology called organic light-emitting diodes are going to be the display technology of the future. And these Russians came in and said, okay, we can help you to organize systematic production and systematic advance in every single aspect of OLED, plasma, and LCD. And they did it particularly well with OLED. And what they did was divided OLED into 200 sub-projects. They appointed a head of innovation. You might have one. A lot of Western companies have one. They normally work part-time. They're normally there as cheerleaders. What Samsung did was put a head of innovation on every single one of those 200 projects, and they drove a systematic approach to making sure that every aspect of those 200 projects produced advances. They now own 90% of that market within 10 years. So that's innovation model number one, which is to say you can't treat it as a joke. If you have the resources to be systematic, you really, really need to be. The second is that most organizations that are succeeding at the moment that haven't inherited their market are externalizing many, many of their key processes. I suppose the best example of this would be Apple and its ecosystem. When I talk about externalizing, the reaction to that normally is, okay, you mean outsourcing. But if you look at Apple's ecosystem around the iPhone, it did not outsource the production of apps. Somehow, the whole production of that app's ecology happened. And it's an externalization of Apple's prior responsibilities. In the past, you would have to develop your apps. But suddenly, 300,000 companies wanted to do it for them. But there are many other examples of this, and you probably have some externalization, for example, in your social media. It's very likely, for example, that in social media, you're trying to externalize some elements of your marketing through Twitter and Facebook. So your social media people will be trying to capture those advocates of the AMP brand and somehow utilize them. So one element of your innovation model is already externalization. But if you get it right and if you take it to an extreme, you can start to do some of the things that companies like Google do. About 4 weeks ago, Google bought Lending Club, or made quite a substantial investment in them, peer-to-peer lending. Why does the search engine want to be in peer-to-peer lending? Because it wants to exploit most elements of the relationships that go on between people online. But I think the reason they're able to do that is because they externalize a massive amount of what they do as a business. So if you look at Google Glass, the project coming out towards the end of the year, most of the development work for Google Glass has been done by somebody else, although we still call it Google Glass. So my second message is that you need to start thinking about narrow and narrow markets. I don't have time to go into that, but I think that the future lies with as many small markets as you can possibly address. And the way that you need to do that is to externalize as much as you can, because you're not going to be able to scale into narrow markets unless you externalize. So a big idea is there's two ideas. You've got to be far more systematic and invest much more seriously in innovation than you thought you had to. And the second is you've actually now got to start trying to manage an ecosystem, identify that ecosystem, and invest in that as well. So, two business models. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Hayden. That's a really interesting idea that you can actually create a platform that allows others to innovate, and that's your, if that's how, if I've interpreted that correctly. Our next speaker is Michael Schrag. Michael is a research fellow at MIT Center for Digital Business. His writing focuses on the behavioral economics of tools for managing innovation. He's a very popular Harvard Business Review blogger and has written a really fascinating piece called "Who Do You Want Your Customers to Become?" And I think that question can help a lot of companies really focus in on what their innovation should be about. Michael, would you like to step up? Thank you.
Hello, good morning. Just to clarify, it's a pleasure to be here. Just to clarify, I'm not here to tell you how to make money because, frankly, you've done nothing to deserve it. And I don't do charity work for people who wear suits. But I am here to talk about innovation and basically the key idea of the book. Who do you want your customers to become? Because in the course of doing a lot of innovation advisory work, I had come to the unfortunate self-belief that focusing on faster, better, cheaper innovation was undermining the real value creation proposition of what innovation is all about. There's this notion that innovation should be enabling a transaction, customer satisfaction, customer delight, giving customers what they say they want or what they think they want. And the more research I did into this, the more real world and academic and economic modeling I did into this, the more I discovered it's frankly flawed. It's wrong. Quick show of hands, how many of you have heard of Henry Ford? All of you have heard of Henry Ford, and I believe Ford shut down their manufacturing plant here not too long ago. Ford is best known for what? Mass production of the automobile. That is what we're taught in economic history. That is what we believe. Fordism became a quasi-business religion worldwide. I'm here to say that we have completely, not completely, largely, asymmetrically misunderstood the real value of what Henry Ford did. Henry Ford wasn't just about the mass production of automobiles. The mass production of automobiles facilitated, enabled, and created the human capital stock of driving. Henry Ford was responsible for the greatest explosion of human capital stock through driving as a skill and competency in the past 150 years. The best way to think about innovation is not as a way to please or satisfy one's customer, although that's not irrelevant. We can discuss that in the panel in a moment. The best way to think about innovation is as an investment in the human capital, competencies, and capabilities of one's customers and clients. And this is true whether you're a consumer product goods company or a professional services firm. And just to give you a more contemporaneous example that ties into what you heard from Hayden and Saul, you look at an organization, company like Google. Everybody thinks about Google as a search company. But if you look at the way they leverage the Web 2.0 PageRank algorithm, what has Google done? But quick show of hands. How many of you have used Google? Congratulations, you all work for Google. Because what Google has done with its algorithm is turned it doesn't just create search, it turns everybody who uses it into a searcher, and Google's algorithm learns from what you click and what you don't click. Google has done a brilliant job of both creating and monetizing the human capital of the Web 2.0 search algorithms that it pioneered. So the big idea that I wish to leave you with is that innovation is about the creation of new, novel competencies in human capital in your customers and clients. And if you have ecosystems and systems that do not reflect and respect that fact, you shall fail, and instead of making money, you will lose money. And that's it.
Thanks so much, Michael. Our last panelist to come up on the stage is Howard Lindzen. Howard is a tech investor. He knows everyone in media, venture capital, tech, and finance, according to what I have researched on the net, and he connects people. He launched Stock Tweets in 2010. This is a real-time social network for traders and investors. It's viewed by approximately 40 million people daily. He also manages a hedge fund. And when he sold his investment in Twitter, this caused a bit of a furore. So, Howard, I'd like you to step up now and explain your big idea. Thanks.
I'm going to give you half the big idea because I want to be invited back next year to fill you in on the rest. So I'm torn between how much to share. I ran out of time on my first speech, so I only got to half the slides, and I'll try and finish it up here. I am super optimistic, and so maybe it's because I live on the beach in San Diego, and I've already ranked Sydney as the #2 city. Without reading any blogs, I've given you guys the #2 city in the world. So I'm very bullish. Well, you like to drill... Excuse me. If my wife was here, that would have been pinned on me. And thank you, Annalie, for having us, by the way. I'm being blown away, first of all, by some of the thoughts I've already heard, because as he talks about cars, I think about what changed my life was starting to publish publicly on WordPress, on Google Blogger. As he talks about the car, I'm an extension of digital publishing. And I think if you are not, this wasn't in my speech, but if you are not sharing, you are falling behind. And not by sharing publicly. You don't have to have 100,000 followers on Twitter. You don't have to have one follower. Your kids may hate you. But there are enough tools to get your company publishing. Okay? Take away the rules, give them a canvas, start publishing, start sharing, start mixing it up a little bit, and your life will change. My life changed in 2005 when I started writing. I searched the word term sheet in Google, found a fellow by the name of Brad Feld who was giving away stuff about how to create term sheets. I took that work, invested in a few startups, didn't have to pay a lawyer. The only people we can't seem to kill are lawyers, and I'm all about trying to do that in the next 50 years. Not going to happen, but it's a good thing to think about. We're doing it in my world with spreadsheets. I'm already off topic, but we're in the world that I live in today, in the mobile social web. We're doing it to accountants and spreadsheets. We don't live in that world. I invest in companies where we don't even ask that question, because if you wrote the business plan with 3 people in a social leveraged world, which is something that I call, the business plan would change. Why would you waste time creating a spreadsheet around a business model that hasn't been created yet? So everything's being disrupted right now. So that's why I'm excited, because a person like me who publishes can end up investing in Twitter, and a person that started a digital or invested in a company called Buddy Media, which in 2008 couldn't raise money. The idea was to create a Facebook currency, which was the dumbest idea, but still became a $700 million company, sold to Salesforce last year. Now we have a currency because of the trust and technology out there, trust breaking down and technology breaking out. Bitcoin, something that will be talked about, if not Bitcoin, some derivative of Bitcoin, which may replace gold as a store of value for 3 to 5% of people's assets. I mean, it's hard to get your head around this stuff. And so those are the things that are going to be facing Australia, where we've been used to digging holes in the ground and investing not just in the people, but what those people will do when we deposit $5 million in their account for a geological spec. But I do my wildcatting in engineers and people. And that's what's happening in the world that I live in. And I'm super bullish on that because my money is very much more accounted for, and it's a much more comfortable thing in the United States. So I think that's the world that's coming over here too. Not that digging and mining and gold are going away, but there's derivatives of all that are happening.
Well, thanks so much, everyone, for your presentation so far. And I'm just going to kick off with a very big question. Oh, sorry. And I would love it if you guys will, continue the discussion between yourselves, as we're discussing these big ideas. But the first big question is, which are the big industries that are yet to be disrupted, that are thinking that they're not going to be affected by the disruption that is happening throughout the economy. If you could answer all of those individually, thanks. Go ahead.
I think the one that I'm focused on is money management, private wealth, which will ring true to a lot of people. I think in the United States, people have become over-diversified and reliant on ETFs. I think we sprung from a country that loved individual stocks up until 1999 to a country that got it ahead. You know, we changed and started worrying about, oh my God, let's just do Vanguard ETFs. And I think the next crash will come from everybody still having to leave the same exit. It'll be a lower fee thing. Oh, at least I didn't pay fees on the way up. But at the same time, everybody's going to be leaving through the same door. So during a liquidity crisis. So I think financial industry is, you know, ripe for disruption. Whether it's, you know, Bloomberg. Why should Bloomberg be a $2,000 a terminal when Twitter?
20,000.
20,000 a year. How can that company still be doing that in an era where Google exists and in an era where I have an iPhone? And what does that mean for the SEC in the United States and obviously ASX here and investor relations? And so those are the things that StockTwits and I invest heavily in this space. First of all, because I understand it. Secondly, because I believe in APIs and all the things that we're talking about. And thirdly, because I think in general, Americans are over-diversified, do not understand the basics of investing, and this stuff can all be retaught now in a social world. So I'm very, very bullish, even though that affects A&P and huge financial companies. I'm bullish for the people that understand that.
I'll take the other end of it.
Sure.
Rather than tell you the industry that I think is vulnerable. I think anybody who tells you that their industry isn't vulnerable to disruption, that would worry me greatly. There is no such thing as an industry that isn't vulnerable to disruption. I mean, even utility businesses, 30-plus year capital payback schemes. I mean, big business models, where they've even figured out how to get revenue loss protection out of the regulators, right? So talk about an insulated, business model. But then when you look at decentralized, energy production and some of the trends that are starting to happen, I mean, if you're sitting in the chair of one of those companies and you're not thinking about the disruption and modeling being proactive about new potential business models, I think you're making a great mistake.
I think that any business dependent on trust is going to be disrupted, because just picking up on what Michael was saying, I think the internet is retraining people in trust, and I think it's training people to build their own trust networks and to build their own trust models. And you can see that happening to a certain extent with the privacy around Facebook. It wouldn't surprise me to see investment models built on Facebook, though I still feel we're a bit vulnerable there. Yeah. But I think the health services would be another example that we really don't care about privacy about our health records as much as we were told we should do. I don't care if you want to know what illnesses I've had over the past 5 years. I'm not going to make it public, but I don't have that fetish about trust because the internet's retraining me in that sense. The second area, I think, is the labour ecosystem. I think we have no idea how vast that change is going to be. And I think if I was in the Australian administration right now, I'd be looking at these mines and saying to myself, there's an opportunity to recreate the labour ecosystem as those mines shed jobs. Because those mining companies have a ton of money, why not start setting up proper labour ecosystems? You're going to see it in Latin America and I think in Malaysia soon. They're going to try and create digital labour ecosystems. And I think you've got a great opportunity with the kind of surplus capital you have in the mining industry to recreate a digital labour ecosystem in Australia.
What do you mean by a digital labour ecosystem?
Well, I mean, there's no reason why you should work in Australia just because you're in Australia.
Yeah.
I think that what you really need to do is say, actually, most Australians have a global attraction, if you get it right, and you can create the kind of platforms where people can work easily from anywhere. For the next 4 months, I'm going to work from the French Alps because I like walking. And I think that kind of freedom is there. We're just scared of it. But you see, if you're going to lay off 100,000 people, why not put 30 million into a platform that enables those people to become entrepreneurial about their future? You're going to do it. You're going to do it again and again and again in the next 5 years. And actually, it's going to cost you a fraction of the unemployment.
So it's the government's job to do that, do you think?
No, it's the mines' job as well. They're going to have to pay billions in layoffs. So why not put some of that into get Howard along and tell us what companies we're gonna make. You know, let these people
Retrain them.
let these people form groups amongst themselves. Create an ecosystem of people that want to create new businesses, instead of making them unemployed. I mean, we should banish unemployment as a concept from the leftover of the mining industry, if you like, or its relative decline.
Okay. Michael?
I'm going to sort of average and reassemble what you've just heard. My view is that the best way to look at an industry that is trying to avoid disruption is just to follow regulators. I'm a University of Chicago kind of guy. Look to see where industries are seeking special regulation, protection, etc., rent seeking in essence. So wherever you see people talking about the public good, the public trust, social welfare, and seeking to craft legislative and regulatory reform, they're not seeking to improve the public welfare, they're seeking protection from the forces of disruption and innovation.
Okay, well, I can think of quite a few industries in this country that are in that situation.
Yes, Australia is famous for that.
Okay.
You're trying not to get come back.
Well, I think
Can I have my seat?
I don't
Bring
have.
your friends.
I don't have to. I don't have to try.
What was it you accused us of being asymmetrically what wrong? I thought you were calling us twits or something. But what phrase did you use in your opening statement? We were asymmetrically
No,
wrong.
historically, there's an asymmetric focus on production and not on the human capital created. Ironically, but appropriately, what you heard here from Hayden talking about digital ecosystems, that's just simply another phraseology for investing in the human capital competencies and capabilities of the miners. They need to acquire different kinds of skills. I think the real challenge we have in the world in general, and probably in OECD countries in particular, is that we're overinvested in educating people under the age of 20, and we're underinvested in improving the skills of people over the age of 40.
Yeah, and I would say that goes to the publishing thing. The
Yeah.
cars, you taught people how to drive. I was a crappy writer. I didn't like writing in school. My son hates writing, but you know what? He's publishing and he doesn't know, whether it's Instagram or Vine, and my son's becoming an artist at a young age without a pencil in his hand, without an HB2
Or a
pencil
degree,
or whatever
or a
it's
degree.
called. Well, the degree is important. You still have to play that game.
No,
I'm
you
still with my son. There's games that you still unfortunately have to play. And you can say no, you don't, but I still think dangerously in the United States, people are saying you don't have to play the education game. And I think there is, as a Canadian, as a Torontonian, I feel that education is still important. But the leverage in the system, think about, I came here, I still don't know where we are on a map because maps are dead. But think about it, I came here, did not set up my Verizon phone because I knew I'd get screwed. I have free Wi-Fi upstairs, so I'm not even connected but 2 hours a day. I came here, I don't know the lay of the land, I don't know what restaurants to go to, and I ask questions on Twitter. And the world fills my calendar for me. Total trust. I know where to go to Bondi Beach, take the walk to Bronte Beach. I know what Italian food to have. I've got entrepreneurs whining and dining me to look at their deals.
Now you do, after the...
Yeah, after the press that you got me.
thanks
Thank
to
you.
the
But-
financial review
but what I'm
story.
saying is, if you 5 years ago, you would have to lay out maps, plan your day. If something went wrong, the whole day would get shot. Now you can just point and walk around like, not like a zombie, because you can be interactive with the thing, but really enjoy full time while I've been in Australia in a very productive way. And that just was not possible 5 years ago. It's not quantifiable. None of us can put numbers on this stuff. That's why you have to be positive. And then let's look at, for example, football or your football game. When we grew up, I'm 48, when we grew up, people used to tackle in a much different way. Now they launch themselves like missiles. So the angle of attack in every business is changing. Whereas StockTwits can take on Bloomberg, even though we don't say we're taking on Bloomberg, there's cracks in the system that can be attacked by 2 or 3 people that have never been vulnerable before. People knew where the cracks were, but they didn't have to worry about them. Now everybody can attack. We saw it in Jurassic Park, how the velociraptors kept hitting the fence, and eventually the fence got down, and then two men could have a baby. We don't have to go that far. But I mean, that's kind of where we're heading. You know, you can't put this stuff back in a box. So you might as well get outside the box.
So the next big question is, we have a lot of very big companies that are, heavily invested in the status quo. They know they have to change. they haven't had to innovate their business models before, how do they start that process, and how do they do it in a way that's actually going to be successful, not just by appointing an innovation officer?
I'll just start quickly. You take a small bit of money at risk capital, and you put some people in a room with a whiteboard, and you say, start putting this money to work, and start. There's two sides of the equation. Entrepreneurs need to feel like they're going to get capital, but investors need to feel like they're going to get a return. That's what Silicon Valley is not really talking about right now. It's all very entrepreneur friendly, and it's swung, you know, and I'm on both sides of the fence, but it's swung way too far in favor of the entrepreneurs right now. Okay? And what I'm saying is for AMP and for anybody here who's interested in investing, you're entitled to make a return. So I think, you know, you've got to really understand why you're doing it, how to do it, but then you've just got to release the funds and at least start trying, like you know, like you're doing. You're setting up a conference. Now you got to go one step further and maybe set up a pool of money, as you did last night with Brightspark, but to release it out there, give, and this stuff will come back.
So
I think that we have to get below the buzzwords here. We've turned innovation into a buzzword. Everything's an innovation. Everybody's an innovator. And of course, when that's true, nobody is, and nothing is. Our sponsor said, you know, we have to go from thinking to building to thinking. I love that. That's absolutely right on. But we actually have to do that. Now, we all live in organizations that are all about thinking to build, right? We have to do all kinds of analysis, write all kinds of reports, go through 15 different committees, you know, and then we select only those projects that we know are going to be successful, meet our ROI, you know, internal hurdles, you know, and those are the projects that we do. Well, guess what? You know, you're not going to reinvent your business model that way. If you want to reinvent your business model, I'll use the technical term, we have to try more stuff. And we do. We just have to try more stuff, but we've created organizations and people in organizations that are afraid to fail. How about calling it intentional iteration? Right? It's not failure, it's trying. We learn from everything we do and then we reapply it, you know, in the next thing that we try. I believe large organizations can innovate. I think they can reinvent their business model, but they can't just say we're going to have an innovation culture and hope that it's going to happen. We have to be much more specific than that. We have to be much clearer about what we mean by innovation, and then we have to organize around the objective in order to happen. Most organizations will not do it. They will not do it. They're going to ride their current business model into the sunset. And that's what they're going to do. Some organizations will do it, but it's going to require a very, very different approach than they're accustomed to. But time's a wasting. You have to get on with it.
Michael, you've got a very good organizing thought for this. Can you talk a bit about the...
No, I don't.
Well, but your question, who do you want your customer
Yeah, who do you want your customers to become?
So,
Because, you know, unfortunately, good to know. Unfortunately, it's better to throw myself off stage.
That's
than-
right. But answer my question, come on.
Yeah, I think that it's important to define whether your innovation is going to come from competencies and capabilities inside out, or from the perception of how you wish to transform your customers and users in. You know, and these are issues of culture, these are issues of economics. My problem, and I'm not trying to make a political argument, but I think we need to begin. Most of the organizations that I work with, they're always focusing on a vision of the future, and you know, it's very nice and all, but it's a bit of a crap because they don't know where they are. And I believe situational awareness is very, very important. You know, if I'm one of the big four banks here, if I'm PwC, if I'm AMP, if I'm on the board, it's a question I'm going to ask myself. And this ties directly to the point here. Do I get a better return on my dollar invested giving money to a bunch of wild-eyed entrepreneurs or to a lobbyist in Canberra? Okay? We have that issue going on in America, etc. You know, so unless it is clear that you have a value proposition that really is going to be, if not transformative, beyond the incremental benefit, the marginal benefit you would get from protecting yourself, you probably don't want to innovate. And just the one way I'd like to connect all these things, what we're really asking you to do is view innovation as a means to an end. And instead of focusing on how do we improve the means better, how do we become faster, better, cheaper on the means, it's what are we really trying to accomplish? What value does our innovation really hope to facilitate and inspire? So that really is the key. I think we need to draw a distinction between innovation as the way we get something and focus on where are we actually trying to go.
I think the the kind of truism in this for me is that the innovation you have to do is much, much larger than you would ever expect. You know, I think you have to do many, many more projects than you can possibly imagine. And I think you have to do those in conjunction with that ecosystem out there. So it's not going to happen in your boardroom. I think one interesting way to do it, and a project I had with an Asian company earlier in the year, was to say, actually, this Asian company said, you know, we have probably about 1,000 products on the slates. One way or another, we've done these ideation programs. We've had lots of people internally tell us what they think is next, and we know we've got our brilliant scientists in the labs. But we have no idea if any of these projects matter to the public, to our customer base, to any customer base whatsoever. We simply don't know.
Oh my goodness.
Can we use crowdfunding to change that? So their proposition was, well, let's go and get the public to invest in what we're doing. And I thought that's pretty smart, actually. If you want to validate 1,000 projects, and you need 1,000 projects or more, then why not set up your own crowdfunding platform and actually interact? You know, does it matter to you really that you get all the ROI off any of these projects? I doubt it. I think if you open out some elements of your business to the crowd, you're going to have considerable publicity around it. Of course, you're going to interact with your consumer base much more quickly. You'll probably find different consumer bases that you never thought existed for you as a company. So I think there are techniques for doing it, you know, but it starts with actually you need thousands of ways to advance, not just one big idea.
Okay, I have another question, and it's about the big social problems that we have, the big healthcare problems, the education problems that we have, not just, and these are issues not just for the developed world, but also the developing world. Are innovators looking at those big issues as problems that can be solved and that have business cases attached to the solving of them, I suppose?
I'll jump in first on that one because I had that conversation with somebody last night. You know, I think where technology fetishes around health, I think that some of the great problems of health that we face can be solved by looking tangentially at what causes them. You know, if you say the big cancer health problem, we're now going to go into genetic screening and that whole genetic mode, and it's going to be an extraordinarily expensive way of dealing with it. Whereas you've got one body of science which says actually maybe 60-70% of those cancers are caused by science, caused by chemicals. And I think what I'd like to see is the courage to debate these things in public without being called a charlatan because you don't believe in the next big scientific advance and the next billion to go into a particular line of innovation. You know, we need to start innovating our rationality as much as anything because we've become somewhat irrational in the way we deal with science and technology. So, a little rant. I had that rant last night. Glad to get it off my chest again.
So this is the question. This is where I live. And the reason I'm passionate about business model innovation, because I believe that business model innovation is on the path to social system change. If you think about any of these systems, let's take healthcare or education, these are systems level challenges that are only going to be solved with systems level solutions. Think about a system, healthcare, as a network of business models, right, that have evolved over a very long time, and they've learned how to coexist together. You know, the hospital, the pharmaceutical company, the doctors, they each have their own siloed business model, and they have figured out over a long period of time how they can coexist to make the current healthcare industry work. We're sitting in the 21st century. We know we want a different healthcare system. We know that. Right? We know it's possible with all the great technologies that we have, but we're stuck in the current system because we're so busy peddling our business models today that we haven't carved out the space to experiment with new system solutions. The most important new business models are networked business models that cut across our traditional boundaries. We need to carve out the space where we can start to experiment with new patient and citizen-centered healthcare solutions that play with the capabilities in a different way to change the value equation. And what we haven't done is we haven't carved out the space to do that around the world. But if we want to transform these systems, that's how we're going to have to approach it, because throwing technology at the current system isn't going to work. That doesn't get us there.
I could not disagree more.
Go ahead.
I could not. That is. You know. I'm sorry. I beg pardon?
Watch your chair.
Oh, no, now we'll have to watch the audience. I'm a hick kind of guy. I think the hypocrisy associated with, we need to try lots of stuff, and then there's a system solution. Sorry, you can't have it both ways, folks. You either try thousands of things and see what emerges, or you say there's a system solution and you bias yourselves towards a systems development. You know,
I don't see the logic there. By the way, one of the
you don't see the logic?
I just want to say
You're the one who
thing
talks about try thousands of things.
One of the biggest killers in the world is sitting down.
So, I think that if you want to take what these gentlemen have said seriously, you should decide, do you believe that there are single or dual system solutions, or are you prepared to do the adventure of risk and experimentation with multiple approaches? That being said, I will not say, but I will say that a weakness of the American system, the Australian system, and especially the Canadian system, and I say this as somebody with dual citizenship, is the belief that a bunch of smart people in a room sitting together looking at data, big data, can come up with the solution to the problem. Good luck to you all on that. Good luck to you all.
My solution is a lot different because it comes from the consumer side, whose only fear is cancer. The only thing that could hurt me right now is cancer or a heart attack, and I sure as hell don't worry about my diet, and I don't know what to read about cancer. So here's what I think that we all can do about that is, it goes back to your network. Everybody should be, the way to treat cancer right now is make friends, because you're going to get, mathematically, just like your identity getting stolen, you can either invest in the system or you can invest in yourself for the time that you are going to get cancer, to make sure you can get into the right doctor, to make sure the paperwork's going to get filled out, to make sure you have an assistant that's going to be able to afford to fight for you to get paid by the insurance that you have that's never going to pay you. So I think there's both sides. I look at it as the guy who, it's the only investment I can make in health that makes sense, because you guys will fight the rest of your life and I'll be fighting for my life. So it's about, unfortunately, making as much money as possible to make sure I go through the system. Well, for sure. Why would you want to make money than to not have it when you really need it?
So in other words, it's going to go down south.
I expect to get screwed, and therefore, we have to be realistic. I'm an investor.
Howard's going to make money while we're thinking about the system change.
Because I'm hearing it, and I'm going, this is going to go on forever, and I need it. Well, I'm just saying, I think we all have to look at it from my world as an entrepreneur's eyes, which is like, they're never going to fucking get it right.
Excuse me, you did say earlier that the entrepreneurial view is overweighted. I thought you were speaking as an investor, sir.
Well, I'm saying it as a future odds-on customer of cancer. That it's the only thing that keeps me up at night, because why else have I worked hard? And that's the only thing that can bring me down. Forgetting a random accident, but cancer is what scares me. Cancer is what scares me. So I think that's an important conversation. I'm doing everything I can to ensure that when I get cancer, God forbid, I will be able to deal with it in a human way as possible.
Don't bet against dementia, too.
Okay. Well, on that note, the audience is being provoked enough. We're going to put the microphone up for questions, so if people could please put up their hands. And who would like to ask the first question?
Thank you, gentlemen. My name is Marcus Crowe from 10,000 Hours. I heard the metaphor last week that this thing called disruption is a point of inflection. It will end, and we will arrive at the new place, whether you believe that or not. And the metaphor was of a tropical storm, tornado or hurricane. I'm interested in the panel's view. A small business guy I was talking to said he felt it was 20 or 30% done, that the outlying towns are gone, but the metropolises are about to be hit. Interested in the panel's opinion, if indeed it is a finite kink or moment of inflection, how far through are we? How much more to come? How much more carnage, collateral damage?
That's a good question. No, I don't think it's a point in time. I think it's going to be a way of life. I mean, I think disruption and the cycles are getting shorter and shorter. I think we as individuals, the organizations we live in, the communities that we live in, are going to have to experiment and constantly be out ahead of disruption. It's a way of life. It's not a point in time.
I think we're all in charge, right? Like, I think we're all our own organizations now. So
Clearly.
every little bit that we network in and protect our own moat I mean, listen, we're back in the moat building business, but at least we can do it. You don't need a castle and you don't need anything. You need to just be out there sharing and connecting. So I think it's not a city versus, you know, I never thought I've lived in 4 cities. I mean, you grow up in Toronto, you're not supposed to leave. You grow up a Jewish person in Toronto, you're a lawyer or a doctor, and you never leave. So I think we live in a world now where you can go wherever you want. I don't want to put walls up around and compare city versus farm and all that stuff. I think there's enough opportunity for everybody to move where they want. You know, we've evolved beyond even Craigslist, where you know, you can live wherever you want. You can do business in Australia without touching ground here. So.
Yes.
Well, I'm not sure there's that much disruption going on, so how would you describe the disruption? Yeah, what do you think this?
Well, the discussion was saying, you know, the outlying towns of bookshops and music retailing are gone. So, and there are others in the big fortresses in the metropolises going, oh, we'll be fine, don't worry, to your
Like
earlier
the
examples.
banks
Like the banks, for example. So the discussion was, you know, eventually you've got to go, this thing will finish. Everyone's got a smartphone, networks work, they don't drop out, it's done. Just like TV's done, radio's done. So, and this was the theory. So therefore, how far through are we before we eventually go, it's done? The things that got blown up have been blown up, and everyone's got the screen, and everyone's got the connection, and now we move on to the new world. That was the idea.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about what happens at the moment, and I'm not an entrepreneur, so don't ask me about business models, but I think what I find really interesting when I talk to younger people is there's a passion to change the world around them that I might have had when I was 18 and joined the Socialist Party. So I used to see it more in terms of these big structures. You know, I was a socialist and these other people were Tories, and I thought that we were almost there. You know, we had social welfare and we had this system of counting how much fairer society became every year, and we had a political system where we could complain if things weren't a bit fair. So I think we had this very ordered sense that we would eventually conquer. But I see in young people now much different dynamic. You know, they want to change everything around them, and if they are entrepreneurial, they're getting there and do it. And I don't see how that will change, but I don't see how that's bad. I think it's fantastic that happens. In terms of cities and urban areas, urban and rural, you know, what I'm most amazed about is how rich semi-urban life is here. For example, in Australia, and I spent a lot of my time in Brussels, where there are just tons of bookshops. And I was up in Port Douglas, amazed how many bookshop cafes there were. So I actually don't, you know, at that level of your living standards, you can lead a good life pretty much anywhere, as long as it's not an inner city ghetto, really.
Go ahead.
Hi, Anthony James, PwC. We talk about innovation, disruption, change. Can we still learn anything from history? Is history relevant?
Yes.
What?
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask Howard to comment, because he does have to head off early to make another speech. So
I
go
can
ahead.
totally be off the wall now because I can leave. You know, history. I wish I'd taken it. There's so many. History repeats itself, obviously. Whether, you know, I'm a markets person, so I see it happening in the stock market. Everybody says it's different this time, and we all know there's no such thing as it's different this time, because moods and markets go hand in hand. You can put all the mathematical models on it as you want, but I mean, we're a moody. Every country has its own culture, and every culture has its own moods, and I think we're still driven by moods. And you know, now the world's connected, so that, you know, people wonder what Facebook, and I don't know the value of Facebook. I don't like Facebook, but everybody's holding hands, or everybody's holding hands of a person who's holding another's hand. That's 6 degrees of separation. And so I think on a market sense, there's, you know, history is truly important, and you need to remember it. But now that there's the subtle change of history is that, and not the markets are different, markets are the same, but now that everybody's truly connected and there's different data sets to look at, as much as we can learn from history, there are subtle changes. And the world that I'm in is changed subtly by the mood of people, because I have different ways to tap sentiment than what we all used to use as sentiment measures. So historically, we have all these models
So how
that
do you
measure
draw a
stuff.
distinction between sentiment and mood? What is your operational distinction between the way you define a sentiment and the way you define a mood?
Good question. I don't think there is one thing. I'm not a person who believes that much in sentiment, because it's changed so fast. And there's good sentiment, like at StockTwits, I think we're a smart community,
Do you
right?
use sentiment analysis tools for StockTwits? Who
No.
runs sentiment?
we have an open API because we don't want to be in the business of deciding this is a sentiment. We want to be in the business, historically, I believe the sentiment, you can grab sentiment from many different groups. Whether, for me, I like reading technology bloggers. Maybe I'm the first guy I think that does this, but I read technology bloggers who could care less about stocks. That's who I get for my sentiment on how tech stocks are going. I don't want to hear analysts talking about Oracle and Salesforce bought ExactTarget today for $2.5 billion. I could listen to the analysts, or I could go listen to the sharks in TechCrunch and on TechMeme who don't care about the stock and are just saying, what the hell are they doing? Or this is an incredible good opportunity. So there's all these different data sets. The history of markets teaches me that I've got to listen to the financial models, and over time those things make sense. But the mood and sentiment have created all these other opportunities. We don't want to be in the business of stock twits, of deciding green light, red light. We have an open API, and if other people feel they have a mathematical model and want to use our API to build the perfect sentiment tool, I probably won't buy it, but I think they should have access to our data to go create the perfect sentiment tool based on our community. So that's the way. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I would say that you have an informal sentiment tool that you've just acknowledged is TechCrunch and TechMeme. And,
Yeah.
and if there was some sort of way that you could aggregate that and have red and green and recommendation engines from that, you would probably use that to prioritize your time, but that's just a hypothesis.
But I do that. I write about what these people are saying. That is my sentiment, and we'll see how people react to it.
So you are your own recommendation engine.
Yep.
And
Anyways,
it's not scalable either.
I think the question, I think the better question you want to ask is, what do you want to learn from history? Because he's given you his heuristic for how he chooses to learn from history in different data sets. So it's not can we learn from history, it's what is it about the way you process, Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, well worth looking at. What is it about your cognitive style and the cognitive style of your network of people that prioritizes how you would choose to learn from history and apply those insights?
I actually think that in some of these sentiments and moods and emotions, you can learn quite a lot, and I think that the job in the financial sector at this level, rather than the stock investor level, is more to say how is trust going to evolve, because I think one of the things we tend not to think about is that, what we tend to think is that certain emotions are static, and trust today means the same that it meant 100 years ago and 50 years ago. And an example I give later today, if you look at the human sensibility around colour, what drives the smartphone industry right now is colour fidelity. So 150 years ago, the Impressionist movement discovered colour, and humans discovered colour. And the experience of colour then is very different from now, where we're investing billions in getting colour fidelity onto small screens, but we're still interested in colour. And I think that trust, if I would be looking at trust and thinking to myself, what did it used to mean? And in the health services, it's meant something very distinct, total privacy. And unless this doctor observes the rule of total privacy, there's no trust, which is total nonsense as well. And in banking, what does this trust mean for you guys? And how is it evolving? What is the public perception of their boundaries? How porous are they about trust? So I think in that sense, you can actually catalogue how human senses grow and develop. Because again, we think, we're trying to serve a customer need. We're actually not. We're growing customer sentiments. We're growing human sensibility to a certain extent.
But
So-
your argument is that the history of semantics is key as well, because yes, trust definitely does mean something different 50 years ago, 20 years ago, and is likely to mean something very different in a transparent environment 5 years from now.
Well, I think the big lesson from that is that you need to understand how, not just the semantics, that yes, it's changing the meaning is changing,
Yes.
but how trust is changing itself. So how the Australian population or the global population regards trust is going to change in relation to what you do with that trust.
And trust is a very big factor in business and in branding. Saul, do you have a view on this
Yeah,
issue?
well, I'm a little bit counter on this. People talk about trust and the importance of trust in the relationship. I want to collide with as many of the unusual suspects as I can. I mean, I like that Michael disagreed with me. I don't want to have dinner with him, but I like that he disagreed with me. That's how I'm going to get better, when somebody challenges my ideas and forces me to think about it more. So I think we have to put ourselves out.
Not even lunch?
Pardon? Maybe lunch. Maybe lunch. But I think that the key is that we have to get out of our silos. We have to get out of our comfort zone, and we have to expose ourselves to different perspectives, disciplines, and ideas. And that's easier said than done, because we tend to hang out with the usual suspects. right? We tend to hang out with the people in our company or in our industry. I want to hear about people that are transforming their worlds, where they live, and I want it to be as different as my world as it possibly can, because I think the place where learning happens is in the gray areas between us.
Do we have another question from the floor? Yes, Alan.
Alan Ryan from the Hargraves Institute. Australia's at a very interesting time. We have an election coming in September 14. We're very privileged to be told that before. We've solved the healthcare system. We have a disability insurance scheme. We've solved the education system. We've got Gonski. And now we've got major business leaders solving productivity and reporting in the business review, etc., around leading productivity and change. What are we doing wrong? What should the conversation be about? You know, we've solved all these things, we haven't funded them, but what should the conversation be about in Australia going forward?
You're the socialist.
I'm sorry, it has to be about Labour. I think that dialogue around what Labour does and how organised Labour regards its role is one thing. But I think from the other side of the spectrum, it's how this digital labour ecosystem is going to evolve. And one of the organisations I work with is involved with two governments at the moment to say how do we develop a digital labour ecosystem, how do we develop a digital labour ecosystem capability so that our people can take jobs off the Australians or take jobs off the Americans, because we don't see that we need to develop a productive economy in the old-fashioned sense. We can filch. So I think if I was your guys, I'd be saying we are very threatened at the level of labour, and we need to develop entirely new perspectives and competences around that.
I think that we have to have more youth represented in the conversation. The generation that has the biggest stake in the future here in Australia or anywhere is never in the room, is never in the conversation, and it's incredible how productive youth can be if we raise the bar and we include them in designing the future, but we never do. We sit around the table as adults, trying to figure out, what is it that we're going to do that's in their best interest, and we should flip it. We should be sitting there, and we should have youth sitting here telling us about the future they want and then enabling them to create and build it.
Better to be silent and thought the fool than to speak and remove all doubt.
Well, on that note, unless there are any further questions, I would like to thank you all so much for really thought-provoking discussion. I don't think we're sort of left with any clear organising frameworks, but what we have done is challenge.
For free.
I know. I want to come out of here with some stock recommendations, but it was not to be. You have left us with some really challenging ideas, and I think that, we have a tendency, I think in Australia, we've had a very decent economic growth over the last couple of years, and we're now coming to the point where I think most businesses are realising that they have to change, and you've helped us along the way in that discussion and that thought process. So thank you very, very much.